Thousands have been killed in the Israel-Hamas conflict, which continues to rage on, and many have been injured alongside. Giving us a deeper sense of the ongoing conflict is Mr. Ghassan Abdallah. He is a board member of Al-Haq, which is a human rights organization. Thank you for joining us, sir.
My pleasure and my honor.
So can you start off by telling us what exactly is the situation back in Ramallah, which is in the West Bank?
Well, the immediate situation is that all cities in the West Bank, about 6 major cities, are completely closed off by the Israelis. We cannot travel from one to the other. And this has many effects, like rubbish cannot be sent to dumping places, and people from the villages cannot reach Ramallah, and no new provisions. But so far, we still have water and electricity and enough to eat. But this is only in one place. But the background situation in the last few months has been very difficult.
Can you elaborate more on the background situation for us?
Yeah, since the formation of the new Israeli government with people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who are extreme religious Zionists, the situation has been deteriorating very much. They have been attacking Palestinian locations and a lot of destroying houses and burning cars and uprooting trees and attacking farmers and so on. And there are more than 200 martyrs killed by the settlers and the Israeli army. And this is one of the backgrounds of why the resistance has probably launched this action in Gaza. They have been also, they were invading the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and even spitting at Christians carrying crosses and so on. So this extreme religious and right-wing and almost fascist government has brought the situation to a boil.
So, sir, what I'm understanding is that you are pinning the entire blame of this ongoing war on the Israeli Israeli government that was formed not too long ago. And you are mentioning that, from what I'm understanding, is you're mentioning that they have pushed the Palestinian militant group to an edge, and that is why this attack happened.
Well, Hamas said that they have been planning for this action in Gaza for more than 2 years. And this takes us back to the beginning of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. And we can also go back to the beginning of the Nakba in 1948, when Israel was established at the expense of Palestinians, and more than 750,000 Palestinians had to leave or were deported. So we have been, almost at war with the invaders, with the colonial, if you like, colonial Zionist movement for the last century or more. This is not new. It's not only one action. I mean, going back to Gaza, there have been at least 5 major attacks on Gaza by the Israeli army since in the last 20 years. And in the West Bank, there have been many incursions, like in the year 2002, when they reoccupied again all the cities and so on. And so many people were killed and property destroyed and so on. So this is an ongoing fight between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli occupation army, which is not leaving us in peace at all. Put it mildly.
But sir, if I may interrupt, I also wanted to ask, like you mentioned that in Ramallah, that there is, before we started this interview, you mentioned that there is no bombing in Ramallah, but you hear aircrafts outside. But can you give us an idea of what the day-to-day life is right now in Ramallah? Because you also mentioned that the exits have been shut, garbage can't be thrown outside. So what is the day-to-day life? What does one do amidst such a situation?
Well, people have been trying to get some provisions from supermarkets and so on. Schools, many schools are closed and universities are closed, and people are resorting to using Zoom and online education. But if you go and see the popular cafes, they are full of people discussing the situation and talking about it. And of course, many people here have relatives in Gaza. They keep trying to see how they are, and or in Jerusalem. And then in the last few months, in order to appease the situation in Gaza, the Israeli government tried to allow some workers from Gaza to work inside Israel. And there are, I don't know, between 15 and 20,000 of them. And now, because of the beginning of the start of these operations, they dumped all these workers in the West Bank. So we have many places now in Ramallah and, of course, in other cities like Nablus and Hebron, places where a lot of workers from Gaza are stationed. And people, of course, are trying to help with food and clothes and so on, and trying to help them find ways of connecting with their relatives in Gaza.
And so, can you also tell us, like you mentioned about the history of this conflict and how far this goes, and how the Hamas has been saying that they've been planning this attack for over 2 years. What I wanted to ask was, we were speaking to a lot of Israeli people, Israeli civilians, like doctors, travel agents, and survivors also, from those who survived the attack also. What we observe is that there has been a lot of bloodshed, and this is on both sides in this case. So, when you talk about a movement like this, which is for resistance and which is a pro-Palestine movement, what do you have to say about the bloodshed? Because it is a fact that when both sides are fighting, there are people who die in between. And what do you have to say about that, given that you are also a part of a human rights organization, and you juxtapose that with the on-ground situation of bloodshed? So what do you have to say about that?
Indeed, being a member of a human rights organization and having been involved in many activities around that, I am against any act that contradicts the international law. I'm against killing of civilians, targeting civilians indiscriminately, and so on. But when we see that Israelis have been doing this for so much longer and with more viciousness, we have a sentence to answer this, that if the Israeli military occupation is so ugly, how do you expect resistance to be pretty? And this has been going on for so long now that there's so much hatred on both sides, and so much agony and so much suffering, and so many people have been in prison or detained without charges. They have this, what they call the administrative detention, and there are thousands of Palestinians held without due process, without any being sent to court, and not to mention what they do to the agriculture, to industry, to the passage, and so on. Occupation, Israeli military occupation, means so many things also. Like, for instance, they control the population register. Every Palestinian holds a card issued by Israel as a long-term resident of the Palestinian territories. But so anyone marrying or having children or divorcing or traveling and so on, all this has to be controlled and recorded by the Israeli authorities. And this, like, administrative control and occupation is not much talked about, but it does affect people's lives and movement and having relatives and visiting or traveling and so on. So there are so many facets to the military occupation that is, when we read about the European Nazi regime, they occupied 22 countries and places for about 5 years or 4 years. Here it has been going on now for 56 years. And, a lot of people think that the international community should do something about it, but we still try to abide by international law as much as possible. And
coming to, I'm really sorry to interrupt you again. So, sir, like I was asking you, one very important question which is coming over here in mind, in terms of the bloodshed, and since you are part of a human rights organization, like you said, that the resistance can't be beautiful because of how the Israeli government has been treating the Palestinians, according to you. But do you feel that this is a solution where two sides are fighting back to back, and there seems to be an ample amount of destruction? Where do you think this is going to end? Because from what I understand at your end, the ultimate goal is peace. But where we see the situation now, there seems to be no peace.
It's a good question. After the Oslo Accords in 1993-94, there was a lot of hope that this might lead to peace, to a Palestinian state next to the Israeli state. And people were optimistic, and there was a lot of activity, whether cultural or economic or political and so on. But unfortunately, first the Israelis had their prime minister killed, the one who signed the Oslo Accords, and then there were these mutual attacks. It was started by an Israeli killing worshippers at the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. And then there was retaliation and so on. And one Israel, and then Netanyahu came to power, who was from the beginning against the Oslo Accords. And then the second Intifada took place in 2000 and 2002 and 3 and 4 and so on, and there were thousands of people killed on both sides. About 1,000 Israelis were killed, and more than 5,000 Palestinians were killed. So the hopes were dashed, and now there's hardly any hope. Anybody thinks that there could be a Palestinian state. And throughout, since 1967, the Israelis kept on this colonization of the Palestinian areas. So the settlements and the number of settlers kept increasing, going up almost in a straight line, whether we have negotiations or whether we have an intifada, an uprising, or whether there is calm or there's violence and so on. So they are bent on conquering more and more of Palestinian land, which is only 22% of the geographic Palestine. So the hopes now are dashed, and of course the international community, which is a misnomer, of course, it is mostly the Western community, the Western states, that which Europe and the Americans, who support Israel almost unconditionally, and they keep helping Israel in so many ways, militarily and in the United Nations against international law. And Israel seems to be like above international law. They don't seem to need to abide by any Security Council resolutions or General Assembly resolutions or Geneva Conventions or the ICC, the International Court of Criminal Justice. They had a decision on the wall that it is a crime, that it is a war crime to have this separation wall between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which does not really separate the two, because they live here and there. They are on both sides. So theoretically, I would like to see peace. I would like to see, living side by side, because we are here to stay. Now there are around 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea, and about 7 million Jewish Israelis between the river and the sea. And none of us are going away. So ideally, we would love to see peace, but with the rise of the Israeli government, the different governments, encouraging more and more religious attitudes and education and encroachment on Palestinians and going back to old Talmudic and Old Testament rules and so on, we don't see a future. And unfortunately, this is mirrored by the rise of the Islamic fundamentalists also. So we are stuck between Jewish fundamentalists and Islamic fundamentalists. And then there are the American evangelical fundamentalists who support Israel with all these ideas about the end of the world and so on, and the incoming of all Jews into Palestine. So people who are more secular and more, if you like, rational, are in the minority. There are more than about 900,000 Israelis who live outside Israel now, and most of them tend to be secular. So we are left with, and again, many Palestinians who leave are also secular. So we are left with the fundamentalists on both sides, and this is very unfortunate.
But sir, if I may also ask you, as of yesterday, we were interviewing a doctor, who was living in Shua, which is the south of Israel, and he was telling us, and this is based on a lot of news reports, which also later fell into the misinformation bracket, that there was this news of 40 babies, being killed by Hamas, the heads of 40 babies being chopped. Now, when there were other news reports which confirm that the Israeli army does not have confirmation on such a news at the same time, but there are many people in Israel who believe that Hamas has, participated in such atrocities, if true, at the same time. And at the same time, the baseline being that we have also seen visuals of, bodies scattered all over the place. So when both sides are involved in, let's say, violence, which even violates a lot of international law. I mean, even it's a war crime, going by those lines. And you say there is no hope. So how do you perceive any of this current situation that you're living in? Because what you are describing to me sounds like the end of somebody's world altogether, because there seems to be no stopping to it.
Yes, we face always a barrage of, Israeli media, and echoed also by the American and European media, unfortunately. While at the same time, we find that media from the rest of the world, from the global south, from places like China and South Africa and Brazil and India and so on, are more understanding of our situation. So perhaps these countries, the BRICS and the BRICS Plus and the rest of the world can step in and try to mediate a better solution than the one that the Americans pretended to mediate for so long, and we see the catastrophic results of it. They're monopolizing the relations between Palestinians and Israelis on one side, and Israelis and Arabs and so on. And they think they can bypass Palestinians by going to all these, what they call the Abrahamic Accords with the Gulf states and so on. But this action last Saturday shows that no, the Palestinians are here and we're not going anywhere, and our right to self-determination and our rights have to be respected, and
but sir,
they cannot be
if I may interrupt you, right to self-determination, but Saturday's attack was violent, so this would also mean right to self-determination by violent means, because when we're talking about right to self-determination and you're being a human rights activist yourself, I'm presuming that non-violence is the path that you've chosen.
Well, the international law gives people under occupation the right to resist in every possible way, including violence, provided they don't attack civilians on purpose, indiscriminately, and so on. But unfortunately, you cannot control this. There are always casualties on both sides, and we as someone involved for a long time with human rights, I would rather not see this, but it's a fact of life, and cannot control the very strong reactions of people to continuous oppression for so many years.
And so, before we part, I had one final question to you. You started living in Ramallah, after the Oslo Accords in '94, and you've been there ever since in these many years. What do you feel is something that could, since you are part of it, I'm asking this to you because you are part of a human rights organization and you are you're well endowed with this knowledge. What do you think is something which would actually put an end to this and bring immediate peace? Or do you feel that there is no room for immediate peace, given how the current situation is?
Well, there were many, movements towards peace after, if you like, violent manifestations. Like after the first Intifada, there was the Madrid conference in 1991, and then the Oslo Accords. And then after the 2000 Intifada, the second one, uprising, which was more violent, there were some moves to try to, but it seems in history, sometimes peace comes after war. I don't know, war being the extension of politics, but you have to establish some kind of balance of force and show that you cannot be bypassed for so long and oppressed for so long. I am older than the state of Israel, and I was born in Akka, near Haifa, and we lived there. And I was a refugee for 45 years before coming back here in 1994. And I was hoping to have to see an end to the conflict, but unfortunately, these hopes are dying off, and especially now in the heat of battle. So we hope that maybe, perhaps, this latest confrontation might lead to some kind of, I wouldn't hope for peace, but at least a period of peace until we can maybe sort out things diplomatically and politically and internationally and according to human rights and international law.
Thank you, sir. And I really hope that peace does prevail in the end. And I really appreciate you joining us at such a difficult hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good luck with your work.
For more such updates, follow The Print on all social media channels. This is Munif Khan, Senior Correspondent, signing off.